Hari Om. How to understand the statement of Bhagavan that the self or the Sachidananda, the Nirguna Brahman alone exists. அகந்தை உண்டாயின் அனைத்தும் உண்டாகும். உருப்பற்றி உண்டாம் உருப்பற்றி நிற்கும். உருப்பற்றி உண்டு மிக ஓங்கும். உருவிட்டு உருப்பற்றும். தேடினால் ஓட்டம் பிடிக்கும். உருவற்ற பேய் அகந்தை. This ego is the source of all that we see as the world. The very nature of ego is anarchy, confusion. The very nature of ego is to hold on to forms, names and forms, vishayas. So, when the I thought arises from the pure I, within a fraction of seconds, we develop Dehatma Buddhi. I am the body idea. We associate ourselves with our physical body, so and so. I am this, I am that, etc. And then we start engaging with the activities of the world. The brain starts its functioning almost the same time the ego arises. And then we start engaging in the worldly activities, being the ego. So, when the ego arises, everything else arises. When the ego subsides, everything subsides. The world is a thought. When the world subsides, when we remain without any thoughts, there is only happiness. When thoughts rises up, the world happens. And then with the worldly activities, with the worldly objects, vishayas, we tend to lose our happiness and get entangled in the worldly activities, which most of the time results in misery, unhappiness, issues, etc. So, to the extent we attend to external things, to the extent our attention is on the worldly objects, to that extent the ego becomes more and more stronger and make us more and more entangled in the worldly things. To the extent our attention turns within, to the extent our attention is on the I thought or the ego itself, to that extent the I thought or the ego subsides. And immediately we feel a sense of peace and happiness within. So, the very nature of the ego is confusion, anarchy. The very nature of the ego is to hold on to forms, to leave one form and to hold on to another form. So it is its very nature to grasp names and forms, vishayas, etc. So when the ego arises, everything else arises, the world arises. And the ego subsides, the world subsides. When there are thoughts, when we let our mind wander on the worldly objects, we experience the world. When the thought subsides with the practice of Mahayoga, while being watchful and alert, so that we keep our attention inwardly on the I thought, then naturally the I thought or the ego subsides. Thereby our mind merges back into its source of presence of Bhagavan, the pure I, wherein we experience peace and happiness. So, to the extent the ego subsides, to the extent we achieve the subsidence of the ego with the practice of Mahayoga by turning within as much possible, to that extent we experience peace and happiness. And when the ego rises up, when our attention is turned towards worldly objects, when we show some interest or inclination towards worldly happenings, whatever it may be, in those moments, ego stands to gain. It becomes more and more stronger by holding on to more things, more forms, more information, and make us wander away from being in the presence of Bhagavan. This is what generally happens in our daily life. We can see that by our own experience. Whatever interests we have towards the worldly things, those interests take us away from our being in the presence of Bhagavan, from our source of the pure I. So to the extent we lose interest in the worldly things, unwanted worldly things, to that extent our abidance in the presence of Bhagavan, the pure I, is more easier. So when the ego subsides by turning within, then naturally the world does not exist when our mind remains merged in the pure I. Again, when the ego rises up, when we let our mind wander on the worldly things, then again we experience the world with its misery, pain and pleasure. So if we want to truly understand how to be in the state of lasting happiness, then naturally we should turn within as much possible so that the ego subsides and we remain merged with the pure I. So this is what is the goal of the practice of Mahayoga. By achieving subsidence of the ego as much possible, so that our mind remains merged with the pure I, the presence of Bhagavan, for longer periods of time, by which it would be possible for the ego to completely merge in the presence of Bhagavan altogether, so that we shall remain in the presence of Bhagavan, to be in the state of pure and peace and happiness as much possible, all the time, forever. So only with the rising of the ego we get entangled in the worldly activities, we lose our peace, we experience sadness. When the ego remains unattached with the practice of Mahayoga, thereby we eradicate the unwanted thoughts, then the ego, being not able to remain by itself for a longer time, it will naturally go back and subside into its source of pure I, the presence of Bhagavan. Thereby our mind gets merged in the presence of Bhagavan, the pure I am. So to the extent we cause this subsidence of the ego, to that extent our mind gains strength to remain in the presence of Bhagavan, to remain in the pure I, as the I am. So let us all remain in the presence of Bhagavan, to remain as the pure I, remain in the I am as much possible, so that the ego gets dissolved in due course of time, being in the presence of Bhagavan. Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala. Let us all remember Arunachala is the pure I, which is there with all of us. நான் அப்படிங்கிறத விட்டுட்டு அருணாச்சலம் வேற ஒன்றும் கிடையாது. அருணாச்சலமே நான் என்னும் உணர்வு, இருக்கேங்கிற உணர்வு. இருக்கேங்கிற உணர்வு தான் ஆத்ம அனுபவம். The experience of existence, our own existence, is the Atma Anubhava. The feeling of I am itself is the presence of Bhagavan or Arunachala. So let us always remain in the presence of Bhagavan, to be in the presence of Arunachala all the time. Arunachala Shiva.